You're watching BionicDance. Don't run on automatic, instead, please think.
When we examine the universe and what we find frightens us, we cannot wish it away. We cannot decide instead to believe something else and expect the universe to conform to our preferences. Let's do this.
I have never once got a legitimate argument from an atheist why life has intrinsic value to begin with. And I've touched on this in a number of videos, and I don't want to get repetitive, but that's something that I've never ever heard from an atheist, is a legitimate reason why life has essential intrinsic worth.
Well, that's for a very good reason. You see, life has no intrinsic value. The only value life has is the value we personally give it, our subjective personal opinion. That's why.
Because when I say the foundation of atheism destroys it, what you have to have at the foundation of any worldview that you present for people to, acknowledge or look to, or you're trying to convince them of your worldview, you absolutely have to have a reason why life has essential worth.
No you don't. The only thing you have to have when you're trying to convince someone of your worldview is the facts on your side.
If morality really stops with us, if we're where the buck stops as far as what's right and wrong, then the only thing that really decides anything about morality or about the value of life is that whoever's in power at the time, or whoever, I guess the majority of people that would agree with a certain view of life and of morality, they would be right. Because if we're where the buck stops, you can't argue for a framework that's outside of us, because again, that's at the foundation of atheism. We are all there is. But if we're all there is, then morality is completely subject to our own thinking, and that is not any kind of framework worth arguing for.
But wait a minute. Listen to the argument you just made there. I mean, you just said
that is not any kind of framework worth arguing for.
Which essentially boils down to, I don't like it. That's really all you just said there is, I don't like this. But that doesn't say it's not true. So unless you can actually show that life has intrinsic value, you haven't actually said anything other than don't wanna, don't like it. But how is that an argument for anything other than your preference? And preferences aren't the truth. Wishes aren't answers. This is not an argument for anything other than your subjective opinion.
If in World War II, Hitler had won and, defeated the Allies, defeated the Americans, and the question that I pose to this guy is that if that had happened, and, morality is completely dependent on whatever we think, if he had eradicated everyone who disagreed with him, would what he did then be justified because, people like him are the only ones left on Earth?
Well, no, it wasn't justified. It wouldn't have been, and neither was what we did. Nobody's side is justified. We cannot point to some external source and say, look, this was the rule book that we were following. It just doesn't exist, and I challenge you to point me to it. It's just not there. I mean, yeah, you might be able to whip out some holy book, but prove to me it wasn't written by humans. I dare you. I double dog dare you to prove that to me. It's just not there. I'm sorry, but you're trying to prove some sort of inherent value to life, some sort of intrinsic value, but I have yet to see that. It's just not there. We value life because we have empathy, but that's something that exists solely in our head meats.
And if we're really the ones who decide what's moral or not, then that's a completely legitimate thing to do. If the only people left on Earth are ones who agree that 6 million Jews, or the rest of the world that disagreed with you, or with Nazism, should be eradicated, and that would then be justified because we are where the buck stops. And I wasn't even asking him that question to get a response. It was just kind of a rhetorical question. I just wanted him to think about it, but he honestly replied to me and said yes. And I was glad he was honest about it, but it threw me for a loop, because that is really where atheism leads.
I hate to break this to you, but Hitler wasn't an atheist. And it's just a fact of life that the winners do make the rules, like it or not.
Because if we are all there is, what's moral is completely contingent on a time period of who's in power. It reminds me of a quote, treason is merely a matter of dates. Morality is really just a matter of dates in an atheistic framework, because we are all that there is.
Here's a problem. You're acting like atheism is just an opinion. But you see, if atheism happens to be true, then atheism is true whether you like it or not. If it turns out that there is no God, then there is no God, no matter how hard you believe, no matter how hard you try to obey the rules of whatever religion you happen to follow, it's still bullshit. It's still not true. So, like it or not, you will be living in an atheist universe, and you're just following a fairy tale. Assuming, of course, that atheism is true. So it will be the fact, it will be the case that we are all there is, that there is no intrinsic value to life, even if you don't believe that atheism is true, if it turns out that atheism is true. So, like it or not, you're going to have to find out what is true before you start accepting or rejecting anything. And right now, the evidence points towards atheism being the case. So you might want to brace yourself for some, kind of tough news here, pal. I'm just saying.
But what's like I said, what's really at the foundation of atheism, or of any worldview that wants to be credible, has to be this argument that life has intrinsic worth, and you cannot argue that morals have any value unless you can argue that life has value in the first place.
But you see, life having value and life having intrinsic, inherent value are two separate things. I value my own life. I value the lives of my friends. I value most of the lives of the people in my family. I value the life of my kitty here. I fucking hate William Shatner and could kill the bastard, but, and there's other people out there who value lives that I don't value and fucking hate people I think are great, and all vice versa. Granted, it makes life a bit of a minefield, but we all value certain lives and not other lives. But no life has intrinsic value. It's all based on personal opinion, empathy, like it or not. Sorry.
I made this comment yesterday on a post on Facebook about abortion, and it said, "To those who are honestly arguing that life has no essential worth until that life is born, tell that to the women who carry a life inside them for 9 months and treat that life as more valuable than their own. It means everything to them."
Well, you know what? Good for them. Yay. But don't force it on other people who don't want it. Not everybody wants to have a baby. Not everybody does. And what's in there is not a person. It's not. It's potential only. It's not got a brain. It's not able to think or to feel. It's just, it's this minuscule little thing. Nobody's gotten to know it yet. And that's where empathy comes in. Because how are we supposed to value something we haven't gotten to know yet? Are we supposed to value it just because it's alive? Just because it's life? Do I value a flower? Do I value a clam? What do I value? I value being able to know something. I mean, take a look at Columbia here. I value her because I've gotten to know her, because we're friends. Maybe she's not human, but I know her personality quirks. I know who she is. If she was a mechanical entity, if she wasn't even alive at all, I'd still value her just as much. Why? Because we're still friends. I mean, granted, she wouldn't be alive, But still, we'd have gotten to know each other. She'd be a learning machine, but she'd have a personality of her own. That's possible to do. I mean, maybe I've read too much sci-fi, but I've gotten the impression that we could someday create an artificial intelligence that could relate to us on a personal level, and we could have empathy for that mechanical entity. I mean, that's possible to do. And I could potentially value that mechanical entity even more than something that's alive. Life is not a magical word. It's not. I could potentially value that robotic life form, if you want to call it that, far more than a fetus. You know, this little peanut-sized thing that can't think or feel. Yeah, that's possible to do. So, I'm sorry, but all of these birth control arguments that say, no, save the fetus, save the life, it's alive, humana, I'm sorry. They bounce right off me because I have no empathy for a fetus, because I haven't gotten to know it as a person yet, and I never fucking will, because it's just potential only. That's it. Sorry. Like it or not, your arguments are gonna fall on deaf ears until you find a way for me to get to know that fetus as a person, which you can't do.
Because that life does have essential worth, and as we've moved further away from God and wanting to decide our own morality, we literally have murdered millions of babies, and there is no argument against that's credible at all.
Well, actually, sure there is. Prove God exists. Because until and unless you can prove that there really is a God, yours is the argument that's not credible. I mean, seriously, if God is the basis for your argument, you have to show there is one. Otherwise, you're just talking out of your butt.
But again, that's just one example of how, as we've moved away from God, we move away from common sense and respecting life. Because as we move away from that, we move away from what God has given us in the reality that is the reality that we have essential worth.
But wait a minute. How is that reality? I mean, where is this God of yours? Prove to me that he exists. I mean, this seems like another case of you saying, I don't like it, therefore I'm going to believe the other thing. Therefore I'm going to believe what makes me happy, because I don't like the alternative. I don't actually see you showing that life has inherent value. I don't see that. I just see you saying, well, the alternative sucks, therefore God.
But in atheism, that's not something that you can legitimately argue for, because at best, even if you argue for what's best for a society, it's completely arbitrary, because it assumes that what's best for a society is something that we ought to practice, as though if our society progressed and got better, that it would make it any more valuable, and it doesn't.
Which makes atheism wrong how exactly? I mean, once again, I hear you arguing for your preference, arguing for what you want, but wishes are not answers, preferences are not truths. So, once again, what's your actual argument? What is it based on? Is it based on any kind of facts? Is it based on any kind of evidence? Is it based on anything other than what you wish were true? The world you'd rather live in? Do you have any basis other than that? Because I'm not hearing one.
And again, it's completely contingent on how history goes and whoever's in power, or and that's with morality being as relative as it is in atheism. That's terrifying because of how we all know the human mind can go.
Okay, you find it terrifying, but what makes it not true?
And I also wanted to talk about science for a minute. The last video that I made was talking about how evolutionists can't run from God, and it got me thinking just about the science side. And that seems to really be where atheists focus so much attention on, is the side of science, and that really, in a lot of ways, is their whole world.
Okay, first of all, there's no such thing as an evolutionist. That doesn't exist. There's evolutionary biologists, scientists who study evolution, but there's no such thing as an evolutionist. That doesn't exist. Now, okay, granted, atheists do have to talk about evolution quite a lot. But that's because religious people are frequently saying, well, the Big Bang never happened, and the Big Bang and evolution are the same darn thing, and all of this crap, and we have to run around putting out those fires, correcting your dumb butts. It's just that religion makes so many mistakes that have to be corrected using science that, sure, it seems like science may be our entire worlds, but it's really not. We're just, forced into that position because of you people.
Studying science itself doesn't have any real worth. If life itself, at the foundation, doesn't have any real worth, then neither does studying science.
Well, maybe not any inherent intrinsic value, no, but some of us have enjoyed the benefits that science has given us over the years. Yeah, just sort of on a personal, subjective basis.
Science isn't completely free of people who would be fraudulent or people who would want to argue for what they believed, even if there wasn't the backing of reality or the backing of science.
Well, fortunately, we have the peer review process to make sure that objectivity is as maintained as is humanly possible.
When you want to trust a worldview, it's very, very important that you can actually trust what a person says, and if morals are out the window in the worldview, as I think I've clearly shown in an atheistic framework, then how can you trust anyone?
But you haven't shown that morals are out the window in an atheist worldview. All you've done is shown that they may be personally scary to you, that they may be too uncertain for your tastes, but that may also be tough luck, because the moral system that you want may not actually exist, and, as I say, that may be just too darn bad. And as to how you can trust somebody, well, the fact is you may have to actually, work at it. You may actually have to put in some, effort, because things may not be inherent, they may not be intrinsic, they may not be objective. You may have to take everything on a case-by-case basis. You may actually have to treat everybody as individuals instead of, having just one big, huge rule book that you can refer to that everybody has to follow. That's a big shame, but what you gonna do? That may well be the world we live in. Again, wishes are not answers, preferences are not facts. What can you do? That's just the world we live in.
And with that, I just want to go from what atheism doesn't offer, which is any purpose, any hope, any meaning to life itself.
What would you do if you discovered, with no uncertainty whatsoever, that there really isn't a God? What if you discovered that and had no way to refute it? That's just all there is to it. Tough luck, no God, what you gonna do? If you discovered that tomorrow, that this is an atheist universe, how would you cope? If you realize that there is no meaning to life, that the only hope is that hope you make for yourself, how would you deal with it? How would you cope? Now, imagine that right now, right here, without any proof that there is no God. Imagine that that's the world I live in, because it is, because I don't see any evidence for a God, and so I live as if there isn't one. And yet I still manage to find a way to live in this world. I still manage to find a way to find joy and happiness and hope, a way to live without a God. I can do it. Why can't you? So what would you do? How would you survive in this world without one, without your God? How would you do it? Could you do it? Could you manage it? A lot of people do. So, what is broken in you that won't allow you to live without a God, that seems to not be broken in the rest of us? I wonder.
And why am I supposed to think that in an atheistic framework my life has any value, and atheists can't even agree on that very essential thing to be the foundation of any worldview? And I just want to take Christianity as opposed to atheism here.
Well, I don't really care who can agree on what. I don't really care What even seems preferable to me or to you or to anybody else? What I care about is what we have evidence for. What seems to be the most true based on what we can prove, what we can show. I mean, even if I don't like it, and to be perfectly honest, I don't like it much any more than you do. But the fact is that what appears to be true, what appears to be the case, is that there is no God, and there is no worth inherently to life or the universe or to anything else, and that everything is what we make of it, what we decide. That is what appears to be the case, like it or not.
In Christianity, you do have, as I said earlier, intrinsic value, purpose, a meaning to life, a reason to live a moral life. It's incredible how this book that one atheist told me was written by goat herders. It's incredible how this book can answer so many of the questions that we ask in life.
Good for you. Now, prove it's anything more than a book of fairy tales. Go on. Please, prove to me that it has any basis in fact, if you can.
But another thought that I've had is that even as you're picking these worldviews and you're trying to understand which one corresponds best with reality, and if the worldview that even corresponds best with reality or fits best with reality is one that should even be argued for or followed, if following what reality is even matters.
Wow. The fact that that's even a question is staggering. Of course following what reality is matters. Wow. Just wow.
God isn't only found in the scientific world.
I haven't ever found God in the scientific world at all.
He's also found in the historical world in the way that you can look to the way the Bible was written and see the historical accuracy of it.
Historical accuracy? You do know there were no Jews in Egypt, right? You're aware that Adam and Eve never happened, right? Wow, you seemed so reasonable at first. I'm starting to suspect I'm dealing with a nut bar. I'm just saying.
There are so many ways to God and to realize that God exists that there really is no legitimate reason or way to run from the reality that He does exist.
Except for providing the kind of raw, empirical, objective, scientific, physical data that we would use to prove that anything else actually existed. I'm sorry, but all you've got, your entire argument boils down to, again, I don't like the alternative, therefore God. That's really all you've provided so far. I mean, the moral argument, I don't like the way morality works otherwise, therefore I like the morality provided by the people who do believe in God, thus I will believe in God. That's your whole argument. That's all you have. I'm sorry, but it just doesn't work this way. You're gonna have to do better than that.
The wrap-up that I want to give in all of this is really just what I argued, that atheism at the very foundation is destroyed because it can't give a legitimate reason why life has value.
Whether or not life has value does not determine whether or not a worldview is true. So, I'm sorry, your entire premise has a faulty basis right from the start.
That's all you can argue for in atheism, is what our opinions are, and whoever's in the majority at any given time in history has to be the one that's right.
They're not right. Nobody's right. Right doesn't exist when it comes to morality. There's only dominant or popular or personal opinion. That's all that exists when it comes to morality. Right doesn't actually exist.
First of all, because Christians don't know how to defend their faith. They're content with just saying, well, this is my faith. I have faith in Christianity, and because I have faith, you have to back off and not ask me any more of these tough questions. I think that when you're asked these tough questions and you can give a legitimate response to them, that you not only strengthen your faith, but you have the ability to convince others of the reality that Christ died for you and that God does exist.
Well, no offense meant, dude, but you've done a lousy job. I mean, maybe you've said what would convince you, But if you want to convince me, well, you're going to have to meet my standards, and you haven't done that at all. Basically, all you've done so far is you've spun a bunch of fairy tales that would never, ever convince me. I'm going to need a hell of a lot more than what you've given me, because what you've given me so far is told me what you do and don't like. And I'm going to need a lot more than that. I'm going to need proof. I'm going to need evidence. I'm going to need facts. And, basically you still said, I've got faith. And faith will never, ever, ever convince someone like me. The power of logic compels you. Logic, reason, evidence, not faith. No, never faith.
And critical thinking is something that's very, very lax, and that's something that I really want to change in my ministry.
Well, let's hope you do. Anyway, until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think. Please take the time to rate this video. And hey, if you dig what I do, subscribe. And please visit my Zazzle store, where you'll find all kinds of BionicDance merchandise. Rating videos has been found to cause fresher breath, enhanced metabolism, and greater sexual magnetism.